Hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Amy. Welcome to Research Insights with Elite Mind Academy. This is where we speak weekly on Thursdays at noon to share with you some insights from our research and our experience into organizational well-being, and often some of the topics that don't necessarily get discussed out in the open, or some of the kind of insights that stay behind closed doors. And big topic within well-being, of course, is diet, lifestyle, nutrition. And we are noticing in our research that a lot of the time for employees' physical health, diet and nutrition can be one of the biggest barriers, especially when we feel that we're time poor and we're prioritizing high workloads and things like that, and we're often on the go. Nutrition can be the thing that slips. So we're dedicating today's episode to really delving into it. We're going to look at some of the practices that have changed in our working cultures that make us more susceptible to lowered productivity from the way that we're eating. We're going to look at how that is affected by the brain gut, or how that affects the brain gut connection, and then how that affects our productivity. We're also going to cover some foods that you can eat that will help you maintain your focus, maintain alertness, maintain energy, and therefore maintain productivity. We're also going to do a little bit of myth busting around snacks and what is healthy, what will support your brain functioning, and what might actually be a bit of kind of red herring in that respect. And of course, we will always, as always, we will take a look at how organizations in particular can support their employees to have good, strong nutrition for productivity. So after that long intro, we welcome our expert guest today, nutritional therapist, Amy Moore. Amy, I'll pass over to you to give a little bit more background about yourself and maybe introduce this topic a bit and kind of your perspective on it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, V. So I'm a qualified nutritional therapist and founder of Moorish. And I thought it'd be useful just talk a little bit about what nutritional therapy is, because I think not everyone knows what it is. A lot of people think that it's about crash dieting, which it's absolutely not. My approach to nutritional therapy is really person-centered. It's really about empowering individuals through education to make better sustained food choices. And then I help them develop food plans, which can be all around, including loads of different new foods. And it's really exciting, all about color and variety. And it's all based on the principles of functional medicine, which means we look at the bodily systems as a whole rather than sort of individual. And yeah, it's a very holistic approach. So real focus on satiety and satisfaction rather than restriction.
Amazing. And that's so useful and really in alignment with our approach at Elite Mind as well. We kind of, when we look at well-being, we try and look at the whole ecosystem rather than breaking it down into just physical health or just cognitive health or emotional health, but actually looking at how that's all connected and how that's all connected in the individual, but also to the social group, the workplace, the kind of even your socioeconomic environment more widely, really taking a holistic approach. So very glad that we share the same values there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Amy, I know that you were sharing a little bit of insight with me before we did this about how our lunch practices have changed over time.
Yeah.
Lunch this is the meal that we tend to have at work.
Totally.
And so it's the one that's most affected by work and also affects our work the most.
Absolutely. Yeah. So lunches have super changed. It's actually, there's a really good article in The Guardian about this if anyone wants to read a little bit more. But lunch has changed so much with the invention of the packet sandwich. So the packet sandwich was invented in 1980s. It was just 43p at the time. And the company that developed it at the time didn't think it was going to be popular because people liked their lunch breaks. People used to make food at home. People would bring it into work, or you'd have a canteen where you'd all have an hour-long lunch break to sit down, relax, chat, talk with your peers, and eat something that's homemade, until the invention of the packet sandwich happened, which then changed our average eating time from about 25 minutes to 3.5 minutes. And it's something that we can do at our desk. It's something we can do while walking around. We can do it on the phone. And what we're doing when that happens is we're not concentrating on the food that we eat. We're not mindfully eating, which means we're not absorbing the nutrients. And that's all to do with the way that our gut-brain connection is impacted while we eat, and then the impact that has on our digestion, our absorption of nutrients, our stimulation of pancreatic enzymes as well to enhance the absorption of particular nutrients too.
Wow. That's fascinating. I think it's really important to notice that, because we often think of, having a quick lunch or a working lunch as something that is increasing our productivity. We're working more hours, so we're working more. So surely we must be doing more and achieving more. And I think this really kind of shines a light, and I'm going to ask you some kind of more questions about that gut-brain connection, because I think that's fascinating. But this shines a little bit more of a light on actually taking that step back, taking more of a holistic approach, and how we can, again, myth bust a little bit in terms of what effect is actually had on the body and the brain from kind of having these much quicker lunches and not taking that pause to really eat mindfully, but also how that then affects what it is that we're actually putting into our body. Sandwiches, no doubt anyone watching this will have at some point in the deal, it needs to be done sometimes. But what we're achieving there in terms of convenience, we may lose actually in terms of productivity because of how the type of food itself, but also the way in which we're eating it affects. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you may or may not have heard before about the gut-brain connection. So this is how the brains in our head links to the brain in our gut. I mean, that's put quite crudely. Obviously, we don't have a brain in our gut, but what we do have is a 2-kilogram organ, which is made up of bacteria and microbiome, which actually we've now found impacts the way that we think and feel and energize much more than we used to know before. So when we are eating, I'll talk about the vagus nerve first, actually. So our gut brain and the brain in our head is in constant communication with one another via the vagus nerve. Now, this is a bidirectional conversation. So both the gut brain will impact the way we think, and the way we think will impact our gut brain too. And if this is severed, they can both work independently. Now, our gut, the microbes in our gut impact the way we think so much that I'll give you an example of a really interesting study which I loved, which is it's a mice study, and they took away a particular bacteria, one bacteria in a mouse's gut, which then made it lose the fear of cats. So it would just walk into its sudden death. It really alters, it can fear response, emotional regulation, all of those things. Now, the gut brain is hugely impacted by the sympathetic nervous system. And so this is our fight flight response. Now, our fight flight response really isn't very good at knowing what a true stressor is and what just our day-to-day lives are. So true stressor, I don't know, get eaten by a tiger is always the example that we're given. Or working on our computer and receiving an email, from our boss out of the blue, which we weren't expecting, which increases our workload. Both of those things will put us into that fight or flight response. What's happening when we're in that state is the blood will be moving away from our digestive system, because we don't need to be digesting food right now. What we need to be is hyper alert, hyper on, to be able to deal with the stress that we have right in front of us. This is why eating a packet sandwich right in front of your desk while doing your emails isn't going to be the best way for our health, isn't going to be the best thing for our health, because there's nothing that's happening there is positive for your digestion, which means you're not going to absorb the energy. So that's the first thing that's impacted when eating a packet sandwich. The second is actually that all pre-packaged sandwiches you can buy from all the big sort of shops are ultra processed, which means they've got types of chemicals in them which really negatively impact our bodies. And also they're quite high in sugar.
That's really interesting. So I'm going to kind of come back. I'll go first to the this kind of practice around having a packet sandwich or doing a working lunch.
Yeah.
And because I think this is really interesting, you know, talking about how we need to be a little bit more aware of actually the whole system and not assuming that they're disconnected, that our gut is doing one thing and our brain is doing another. You know, our gut will be impacted by our emotional state, exactly like you say. Sometimes we don't even realize when we're going into this fight or flight stress response because it's so normalized in the day to day as something that we feel as we're working. You know, you have a stressful reaction to an email and then it may dissipate when you feel more in control, and then you may have that stressful reaction again when something changes, you discover that, you know, a piece of work hasn't been done or is going to get delayed or something like that. And you know, in the day to day, all of that can affect our blood sugar as well, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit in later on. But all of that, you know, having that release of cortisol will also release sugar into the blood, and we're then cutting off, just like you say, kind of we're going into the sympathetic nervous system, whereby our digestion is not kind of doing its job in the way it's supposed to. So we're not actually processing the energy from that food in a useful way, in a way that the body is going to benefit from and the brain is going to benefit from. And I think that's just very important to highlight, that we, to kind of really, I'm spending a bit of time on that to really drill home the message that you are not being more productive by working through your lunch break. Really not. And even for the mind, you know, we've talked in previous episodes about these cycles that the brain goes on every hour and a half. You can only really focus and really take in information for about an hour and a half before, if you imagine kind of a filing cabinet, and your new memories, your new experiences are like paperwork that gets stacked up on top of the filing cabinet. And at some point that needs to be filed away in the filing cabinet for that any of that paperwork to be useful and kind of ordered in our minds. And once we kind of get past an hour and a half of taking in information, that pile just gets too high and wobbles off, and some things fall, and essentially you don't get to file that information in the same way, and so it's much harder to then recall and to put into practice. So even just using your lunch break as an opportunity to step away, break, and allow some of that kind of unconscious filing wave experience to happen, mean that you're learning a lot more, and you're kind of taking in the information in a much more productive way.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's one small change that organizations could make now, which is just encouraging lunch breaks. And that's from every level. So if you're super senior in the organization, you taking a full lunch break, take it away from your desk, is going to really help people think, oh, I can do that too. Because I feel like often it's a culture thing in organizations for, yeah, my sister just will never be able to eat lunch away from her desk because no one does in the office.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really you've kind of pointed out something really important there, and that's about culture. Because when we put this all on the individual, if it's against the culture, it can be a lot harder. Whereas as an organization, and especially as senior leadership in an organization, you have the power to influence that culture. And if you create a culture of making a dedicated space for eating, and you really reward employees for taking that time and taking that space, instead of rewarding employees for working through their lunch break. When I say reward, you know, we're not necessarily talking about tangible things, but we're talking about kind of even just praise and say, you know, well done for taking your lunch break. And role modeling and showing that is respected in kind of good behavior, seen as good practice in the workplace, make a really big difference to how employees feel about making these changes that will positively impact their well-being.
Definitely.
I also wanted to follow up. What was the second point you said that I've now forgotten?
It's about the types of food that's in a
ultra processed food.
Yeah, and ultra processed food. Big topic in nutrition at the moment. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about that, and how kind of eating ultra processed foods rather than eating whole foods, how that can influence our minds, our kind of energy levels, and those things that can influence our productivity in the workplace?
Totally. So, I mean, humans have been processing foods forever. We used to smoke foods to preserve them. You know, we pickle, we ferment, we put things in jars and canning. So there are certain levels of processing which are okay. There's a new processing category, which is something that's only been happened, you know, since modernization, which the best and quickest and easiest way to know if it's ultra processed is if you look on the ingredients list and there's something in there that you wouldn't have normally in your house, in your store cupboard, which sounds, I don't know, it will sound very pharmaceutical. That means there's ultra processed foods in there, and they sort of wreak havoc with our digestion. They are, they're often full of sort of sugar. There's some sort of fillers in there which are literally just in there they're pointless ingredients just to fill it out, which are really, you know, they're gastric disruptors. But most of us, I mean, in Britain alone, 50% of our diet on average is ultra processed foods. We've sort of moved away from the whole foods model. We've moved away from preparing our foods. And I mean, it's no surprise. We're all so time poor. And it feels easier to just grab something off the shelf and eat it while walking in between meetings than to actually take a step back and start preparing our foods. But even the foods that say that they're healthy, they make health claims on there, high in fiber. You know, they'll say, oh, contains whole oats. It'll just put one thing. They'll put one ingredient on there, which is their sort of showcase ingredient of being some sort of healthy food, to mask what's actually in there, which makes me quite angry because it makes
makes me quite angry as well, because I think it's really capitalizing on people being in a state of urgency and rush and vulnerability and information overload.
Yeah,
we can't expect everyone to be an expert on nutrition. We can't. We can try and kind of educate in bite-sized chunks in this way by kind of doing LinkedIn lives, or, you know, in organizations, something that can be really useful is having an education session to just give some basic tips about how to identify these foods.
Definitely.
So, you know,
I think that's really important. Definitely.
My train of thought.
No, that's all right. Don't worry. I think we were gonna sort of start moving on. I didn't answer your second question actually, which was around the types of foods that people can eat for their lunches, which is going to be a better option than sort of grabbing a packet sandwich or grabbing something really quick and easy that's pre-made. What you are always looking for, sort of on your plate, to enhance productivity and make sure your blood sugar levels are balanced, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to prevent those massive peaks and then those crashing troughs, which all of us have experienced probably around 3 p.m. when we all tired. You go get another coffee, you go get another biscuit. That's what you're avoiding. And when your blood sugar levels are balanced, you don't have those energy crashes whatsoever. You don't actually crave then sugar. So a plate, a plate as a whole, half of the plate you want to be dedicated to sort of fiber rich foods. So those are foods that are fresh vegetables, legumes, cruciferous vegetables, green vegetables, all the different types of vegetables in the varieties that you enjoy. A quarter of your plate you want to be looking at some sort of high quality protein source. Now that doesn't have to be meat derived or fish. That can be from tofu. I really enjoy sort of scrambled tofu at the minute with sun-dried tomatoes and onions and garlic through it, and plenty of seasoning. And then you want a quarter of your plate to be sort of healthy fat sources too. So that's olives, coconut, olive oil, coconut yogurt, all of those really good foods for you.
Yum. Okay. I mean, it's making me hungry now. It's lunchtime, isn't it? Even talking about this, but I think that's a really useful way to think about it, because when we then compare that to, say, a packet sandwich, it's so far down the other end of the spectrum. And I think that can, you know, we can still have things like we can still even have sandwiches, but maybe we've just made it at home, and then we also have a salad on the side, or kind of some vegetables as well, and some hummus or
totally
high protein, high fat accompaniment.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there are ways that you can still have convenience, but just to make it a little bit better, and we'll really notice that difference in our blood sugar. I can talk from personal experience in this as well. It's that kind of having, I know you and I both really do make an effort to manage our blood sugar, and the impact that I have seen in terms of my energy levels, also managing symptoms or experiences like brain fog, that is something that can radically change your productivity. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will be very familiar with that 3 p.m. slump.
Yeah.
And what happens is you then caffeinate yourself, or you get more sugar, which doesn't help, in the form of biscuits or something else. And then realistically, you have kind of 2 hours there where you're working at a much lower capacity. And also, if you're then introducing stimulants, you're probably influencing the quality of your sleep, which then has repercussive effects for your productivity and your energy levels generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Some nifty blood sugar balancing tricks. I mean, we've probably got 100 of them. But as you're saying, a really simple one is just like editing the order in which you eat your food. So if you do want to have a sandwich at lunchtime, absolutely fine. But maybe have a side salad first, because the fiber in the side salad, and then if you use a dressing using some sort of apple cider vinegar or white wine vinegar, that's going to really help alter the way that you process the sugars later on for the foods you eat. So having a salad first and then having your sort of highly carby, sugary foods after is going to be a really nifty trick that you can do, and super simple, and also nice that you can have a starter for your lunch.
Absolutely, I agree. I think there's I love having multiple components to a lunch as well. And really, I think encourages a more, once you're becoming more conscious of these practices when you're eating anyway, you are entering a relationship with the food that you're eating that is much more mindful. And even outside of kind of the positive impact of that on digestion, so if you're being more mindful about it anyway, and you're more present in the moment with what you're eating, then you're likely moving into the parasympathetic nervous system, whereby your digestion is flowing a lot better. But also, again, for your productivity in terms of having that mindful moment to allow your kind of memories and the information to file away in your brain, can have a really positive impact as well. We've we're jumping around a bit in terms of topics, but we've kind of started talking about it, so I'll maybe launch into it straight away. Is this, because we talked about this 3 p.m. slump and what often happens when you reach for a snack. And not all snacks are created equal in kind of the effect on your energy levels and the effect on productivity. But it can be really hard to know, because as we've said, the branding and packaging for a lot of snacks that you'll find in the supermarket, they'll say things like high protein, high fiber, contains different vitamins, all of which actually just masks the fact that they are probably quite high in sugar. Or if they're not high in sugar, they may have other fillers and kind of ultra processed and have these chemicals that will disrupt the microbiome and disrupt how we absorb that energy. So how can we tell? How do we know? What are your tips for being able to pick out a good snack?
Tips on healthy snacks. I mean, it's really difficult to find any sort of pre-made biscuit, cake that is healthy, not just because of the sort of ultra processed ingredients in there, but also any of the sort of white powder ingredients are processed in the body the same as refined sugar. So if you look on the ingredients list, you say, okay, there's X amount of grams of refined sugar in there, but also you need to be looking at how much white flour is in there, for example, because white flour, white rice flour, all of the white powders process exactly the same in the body as sugar. So it causes, that inflammatory state. Sugar is, it's a huge hormone disruptor. It's a gut microbiome disruptor. It might increase the negative pathogens in your gut. All of which will decrease productivity and decrease your health overall, which is the most important thing, really. So any of those types of convenience snacks, unfortunately, aren't going to be the best option to grab, even the ones that say they're high in fiber. So what I would suggest, if you want something sort of quick and as easy as that, is, you can make your own nut, trail mix. So get a bag of like mixed nuts that you really like, obviously the raw variety without salt on them, and you could put a little shavings of like your 70% or above dark chocolate in there, for example, if you like that sort of sweet and savory thing. Or of course fruit, fresh fruit is a really good option, but also I can see that it's not as exciting as maybe a biscuit might be, so just combining them with some other ingredients. For example, if you want to use a high sugar fruit like banana, then I'd reach for a nut butter to combine with that, because then you're also going to get the protein and the high quality fat from the nut butter and the fiber, which will then help reduce the blood sugar levels, reduce the blood sugar spike of eating that banana alone.
That's a really good point. It actually just reminds me of something that I used to do in an old job when I was working in an office. And I actually always had a jar of peanut butter in my desk.
Yeah, of course you did. I think you used to have edamame beans at like
I
at work as
did.
well, right?
Yeah, I did. I used to have edamame beans at work. I was that person in the office that would make like unreasonably lavish lunches at their desk. But I really stand by it because it made me a lot healthier. It kind of gave me more energy in the afternoon, and it you know, there's a reason that I kept doing it, even though I met a lot of strange looks in the office. But having something, I often recommend peanut butter because it is something that it's tasty. You know, most people like peanut butter. I don't know if that's accurate or not. Most people I know do, but
Yeah.
if it's not peanut butter, any kind of nut butter, whatever likes you. I'm trying to get one as well that is like 100% nuts, roasted nuts, rather than one that kind of has a lot of added salt, sugar, and oils. Exactly. But something like that with then with a banana or an apple, any kind of fruit, if you're eating that at the same time, then it sounds like you're kind of really kind of raising your chances of having of not having a glucose spike and then therefore a glucose crash. I'm just looking at the comments here. I've realized I've been neglecting the comments. So I think we're kind of getting a few comments saying, you know, wow, that the 1980s packet sandwich has a lot of comments before.
It does. It really does.
I think it really does. And Laura also saying, you know, definitely guilty of getting a meal deal.
It's also so cheap. This is the thing. It's a cost-effective way of doing it.
It's so cheap. And actually, Laura's highlighted something really useful here that offices and workplaces can do to kind of make that a bit more accessible, or kind of make healthy lunches a bit more accessible. But is that work has started offering free lunches with a salad bar. And that means you don't have this pressure to go and get a meal deal. And you're also then kind of not encountering the barrier of expensive foods, because you know, let's be honest, a lot of healthy foods are more expensive, or even if they're not necessarily more expensive in the moment, you know, like going to buy a piece of fruit isn't necessarily more expensive than buying a snack bar. But what, in the grand scheme of things, sometimes it's also the time investment of buying raw ingredients and whole ingredients and then cooking at home.
Totally.
So there's kind of, I don't know if you know anything about this, Amy, but Laxman has asked, did you know that cordyceps? So you can recognize this. Is that
a type of medicinal mushroom, an amazing type of medicinal mushroom, actually, which I have heard has been the best for boosting productivity and your libido, I think, for cordyceps. But one which is really, I know a bit more about, if you're into medicinal mushrooms, Laxman, is lion's mane. So this one is really good at enhancing sort of neuroplasticity within the brain, which allows us to think more creatively, to the point where they've actually found in some research that it's going to have potential positive impacts for Alzheimer's treatment. So that's an exciting bit of research coming up.
Wow. That is really exciting. And I think, you know, having this awareness around these things is, we don't need to think about it as, oh no, you know, there's so much kind of esoteric information here that how am I supposed to know all of this? But this is the kind of thing that you can just see as like a fun, like it's a fun way to experiment. It's a fun way to kind of keep up to date with things. You don't have to radically change your dietary habits, having lion's mane every day. But let's say you want to give up caffeine or something else, then this is the kind of information that can help you
definitely
for something
else. Totally. Yeah, it's great. Just including it as well as, do what you're doing already, but include other things in there as well. And if you want to put some medicinal mushrooms in there, I'd say that's an amazing way to, well, just one, increase the amount of nutrients you're getting because they're incredibly nutrient dense. And yeah, all of the different ones have lots of different benefits. So explore them and see which one works for you.
Amazing. And we've also got a question here from Laura. So do we know anything about hunger cues? So she recognizes that it can be related to stress, but sometimes doesn't have them. And it means that she'll only realize that she's hungry when it's quite late. And then you kind of get into this decision paralysis around what to eat because you haven't prepared and it's not part of the routine. And I guess one thing I would say for this is the benefit of routine with eating, and not just for kind of bypassing these difficulties that you can experience with hunger cues and then how to respond to them, but also because when our body is expecting to eat, it starts doing the things that it needs to do, producing certain enzymes, and getting into the state where it's going to absorb the most nutrients and kind of have the right environment in our stomachs and in our digestive system to take in that food. So trying to be really strict, I would really advise putting in your calendar, and actually organizations can really support this by simply having respect for people's lunch breaks and their calendars and encouraging this practice. But put your lunch break, and if you can, like an hour lunch break, not just a half an hour quick dash, but if you can put an hour lunch break, I know in a lot of jobs it's just not possible. But if you can put an hour lunch break in your calendar, do that and really stick to it every day. Even if you're in the middle of something, stop. You can always come back to it. Have your lunch break. Have that something prepared that you take with you, so you know that that's what you're eating, rather than only responding in the moment that you feel hungry or waiting for a hunger cue. Also, Laura, you've touched on something really useful here, is really understanding our relationship between stress and hunger, because it can go two ways. So when we're really stressed, we can be very consumed kind of in this cognitive analytical state up in our heads and really focused on what we're doing, and in this fight or flight when we've kind of shut down the digestive system, and that can make us not feel hungry and not feel, also because that cortisol may be actually releasing glucose into the blood in the moment. While the glucose is there, we feel like we're fine. We don't need to eat. But then the other side of that is actually after the stressful event, we'll have this crash, and eventually we'll burn out if we keep kind of tearing through our glucose stores like that, and we're in this state of high stress. And we're also entering an emotional state where we're much more likely to reach for dopamine foods, which is normally foods that are high in sugar, high in saturated fats and salts. So trying to even just understand how that's going to influence your cravings and preempting it by having something ready, what time you're going to eat lunch, and really sticking to it can kind of help manage that a bit. I don't know if you've got anything to add there, Amy.
Yes, well, stress is a massive hormone disruptor in all areas of our body, and our satiety signals are hormones. So yeah, it exactly what you said. It can disrupt it in two different ways. It can make you go into that, like, I'm triggered, I'm going to eat loads of different things that are high fat, high sugar, high salt, because they make me feel good and I feel terrible. Or it goes into that, I don't want to eat anything, I'm not feeling right. I guess one way, if you've got a highly stressful job, Laura, that you could most positively impact your satiety signals is making sure you have a high protein, high fiber breakfast. Because then if you are having a stressful day, if you've had a good enough breakfast, it is actually okay if you don't eat again until you get home in the evening. That's not a problem, as long as you're taking a break for yourself within that, of course. Go out for a walk, get the sunlight on your face, make sure that your circadian rhythm is triggered by natural sunlight. All of these things are going to really positively affect you.
Absolutely. That's such good advice, actually, to really emphasize the power of a breakfast to then set us up for a better relationship with food. for the rest of the day.
Totally. Good tip for that as well. If you're running, if you have a busy life, again, packet sandwiches are now increasing on the popularity for breakfast as well. People grab one on the way to work. So people will be having one for breakfast and one for lunch, potentially. Is making a frittata if you eat eggs. So frittata, you can put, some sweet potato in there. You can put spinach in there. You can put all the different types of vegetables that you really enjoy. And you can make that on a Sunday evening, and that will last at least until, Wednesday. So that's 3 breakfasts that you can have, and you can have that just before you go to work, or take it with you and have it at 11 o'clock if that's what you like to do as well.
Absolutely. That's such a good tip there for kind of something that is kind of will last a few days, and you can kind of batch a little bit of a breakfast. Also, for if you don't eat eggs, then you can get some silken tofu and blend that up with kind of some spices or other things. Use that instead. So make it vegan if you need to. Put some kale, broccoli, whatever, whatever makes it tasty and kind of desirable for you, then absolutely do that. We also had a question from Tracy. Which is the best peanut butter to buy? So which has the lowest sugar?
Good question. I feel like maybe you eat more peanut butter than me, V.
I do eat quite a lot of peanut butter. So my personal preference is Pip and Nut. When we were not sponsored by Pip and Nut, anyone, but if Pip and Nut want to sponsor us, then go ahead. But Pip and Nut I quite like because I like the roast of it. I think it is quite a dark roast peanut butter, but it's still fairly smooth. They don't have loads of added sugar, they don't have loads of added salts and fats. I think that might be, it's either 100% roasted peanuts, or there might be a tiny bit of added fat, but I know that it's nowhere near the levels of like added sugar and salt and palm oil and things like that you can get in others. The other one is Whole Earth peanut butter. It's not as dark of a roast. God, I sound like I'm talking about wine or something. It's not as
a very serious issue.
Very serious issue. But it's not as dark of a roast. I think the peanuts are kind of closer to their rawer form, and that is definitely 100% peanuts. So, and my other tip with it is get the big liter. Peanut butter lasts quite a long time in the cupboard, without needing additional preservatives and things like that. And it's, we can often think of nut butters as more of an expensive item. And it just means that it reduces your labor involved, but also reduces the price of it overall. Tracy, you use Whole Earth Crunchy. I'm a crunchy gal as well. I think.
Yeah, I like crunchy.
I like the versatility and texture.
Yeah. Me too. Question from Laura. So lion's mane tablets any good or better to eat? Yes. No, definitely. So you can't actually legally forage lion's mane anymore in the UK because it's an endangered species. So unless you have a supplier that's growing it, sort of farming it, which there aren't many, it's hard to come by, definitely getting it in sort of powdered form would be a really good recommendation. Although if you ever do see a supplier, find a supplier. I did see some at Borough Market once. I would recommend buying it because when you cook it sort of just in a little bit of butter and lemon, it can taste like lobster. So it's a really interesting mushroom, and the texture of it is incredible. So I would recommend eating it for pleasure, but definitely go for a powdered form.
Amazing. Oh, what great insights there. My goodness. That's fantastic. Okay, so lion's mane's on there. I guess kind of thinking about this then. So a lot of organizations, Laura's mentioned how her organization is kind of supplying lunch, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
And including a salad bar. So making sure that the lunch that you are supplying is one that has a lot of options for fiber, fat, high quality fat, and high quality protein, both plant-based and animal products, depending on kind of what your workforce population like to have. But actually, just one thing on that as well is that I'm noticing that a lot of offices are buying oat milk instead of, or kind of at the same rate as cow's milk. And I kind of give a bit of a knowing nod there, because I think it's worthwhile to just be aware of the fact that oat milk is very high in sugar. So it is going to be spiking your glucose level, having a lot of oat milk in your coffee. So to just be aware of that, if you do like oat milk in your coffee and you would prefer to have that, There are some that have that are less processed and have lower sugars. Even the ones that say, no added sugar, they often add an enzyme to break down the starches. Actually, it is still quite high in sugar, and oats anyway are.
Sneaky.
I know, it's very sneaky. They're very sneaky, these companies.
Yeah.
But if you are going to have that and you enjoy your oat milk, that's absolutely fine. Maybe have it after your lunch that also has the kind of high fiber, the high fat, and the high protein.
Totally. Coffee.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, coffee in general, actually, as a rule, is an anti-nutrient, which means when you drink coffee, your body will prioritize processing the caffeine above any other type of food. So actually, having a coffee either an hour before or after food is better. Leave an hour gap in between coffee and eating, basically. Otherwise, just to make sure you're maximizing the amount you're actually absorbing when you do eat.
That is such a useful tip. Really, really handy to know, because I think, we can sometimes think of having a coffee on an empty stomach as though that's something that is, negative, like it's skipping breakfast, and that's necessarily bad. And actually, it's not necessarily bad. If we want to delay our eating for an hour afterwards, we can still enjoy our coffee in the morning if that's part of our routine and our habit. But actually, it's more healthy to just wait and have our breakfast or a lunch, whatever it is, a little bit later. The other thing as well I just thought of there is that if you're having caffeine at the same time as having a high sugar milk, then you're obviously going to be kind of increasing the glucose spike. Laura says she is switching to sugar-free soy as we speak, which is actually what I have when I'm having a plant milk as well.
Me too. Yeah, I do as well.
Just a couple of quick questions before we kind of go into more about what organizations specifically can do. From Laxman here, question: vegans are more productive?
I think that's too broad. No, I don't. I think that I don't think so. I think it depends on the person. I'm not sure that you can attribute one particular sort of diet choice, an ethical diet choice, to attribute to more productivity. Actually, a lot of people who do a vegan diet will have a very highly carb-heavy diet, as they aren't often getting, the sorts of proteins that other people would choose, which will potentially impact productivity. So you can do all of the tips we're giving on a vegan diet. With you just have to be a little bit more calculated with the amount of protein you're getting and where you're getting it from and how high quality it is.
I think that's really important to note, because there can be a little bit of a myth around, veganism is just healthier, simple cars, and actually that's not true. A lot of vegan products can be ultra processed because they're trying to mimic animal products and therefore need to undergo a lot more processing. But just following the same principles of eating whole foods, but doing that without animal products, you can still have an extremely healthy and low, anti-inflammatory diet. But just being aware that a lot of vegan sources of protein will also be quite high in carbohydrates. And so you just balance that with having less carbohydrates from the other sources of food in your meal. So it's very kind of easy to adjust. Sorry, there's not a kind of catch-all answer.
Yeah. As with everything, there's no easy answer for this. And nutritional therapy also is just so individual as well. One thing will work for one person and one thing will work with another, which is why if you're interested in this, I'll definitely reach out and have a conversation with a nutritional therapist in your area.
Yeah, definitely. I think that can be really useful to be aware, start to engage in these practices where you get to learn what's going on in your body and how you respond. Different kind of hormonal complexes, metabolisms, all sorts will affect, intolerances, allergies, all of these things mean that different diets are better for us. And so starting to kind of eat more mindfully, as we've been talking about, will help you to learn about your own body and how you respond to different foods and how you feel after them, rather than just assuming or taking for granted, well, I always have an energy crash at 3 p.m. Well, start experimenting and start noticing the days when you may have worse of an energy crash at 3 p.m. with this kind of lunch, or less of one with that kind of lunch, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we could talk for hours. So moving swiftly on to kind of specifically how organizations help. So we've talked a bit about providing lunches, and how organizations can really encourage actual break taking for lunch.
Totally.
Allowing, a lot of organizations these days, especially kind of more office-based, less frontline work, are giving more flexible hours, especially with home working. So if you are at home, what I often do is I'll either start earlier or finish later or both, and then I might take a 2-hour lunch break. Where I'll stop, I will cook a meal for myself from scratch, and I'll go for a little walk, maybe run a couple of errands, come back, and I feel so much better, and I'm actually so much more productive in those afternoon hours than if I were to kind of just speed through my lunch and then have a lot of brain fog for the rest of the day.
Definitely.
So encouraging that and allowing that flexibility with working hours can be really useful.
Yeah.
So snacks. Sorry,
Yeah.
what were you about to say?
I was going to say education is going to be a really powerful one for organizations to start implementing as part of an extended wellbeing program. I think people are asking for more sort of enhanced wellness offerings within their work organizations. And again, wanting flexibility, wanting to be able to work remotely if they want to. All of these practices are becoming normalized within sort of organizations. And yeah, not everyone has the sort of privilege of having the knowledge of nutrition. Certainly the wording that our governments put out there is just for big companies, big snack companies promoting their agendas rather than just focusing on what actual health is. So I really think organizations bringing in external people. I've personally worked with a few organizations in developing nutrition plans for their team members. And I think this is something that's actually gaining traction. People say that they love it. We spoke yesterday about sort of gym memberships and how some people don't really want that because they do exercise, they go running, they have a running club or whatever. Whereas some people might prefer having sort of this advice given to them so it can empower them to be able to make those decisions for themselves.
You really reminded me there of something that I think is so important that kind of can impact positively and actually increase the uptake of benefits in a way that means they're actually benefiting people. Is having a flexibility around your benefits as an organization. So having, like you say, sometimes people can get discounted gym memberships, but I'm someone, I like to run outside. I will do yoga at home or kind of other exercises like that at home. That's how I prefer to exercise. I don't really like to have to go somewhere to a particular place in a gym to go and exercise.
Yeah.
So a gym membership is not that attractive to me. What I would love is something like a food bursary, a health bursary, vouchers for particular kinds of food, or access to like a discount at, I don't know, the local grocer, or somewhere where essentially it's the same kind of expenditure, but you can opt out of one thing and opt into another, the thing that you're actually going to use most.
That'd be amazing.
That would be chuffed. So HR departments, take note. Think about looking at flexible benefits schemes.
Totally.
That include things like nutritional therapy instead of, you might be able, some people might choose to get a massage or like a coach or something like that. But actually, what might end up being most beneficial for someone is access to some nutritional therapy sessions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question from Anne. Great conversation. Any recommendations for who to follow on Instagram? Yes, I've got lots of people. So yeah, Laura said the glucose goddess. She's amazing. She'll give some really nifty tricks on how to lower your blood sugar levels. So I definitely follow her. I really like Nutrition as well. She's amazing. You're welcome to follow me. So that's at Moorish Nutrition as well. Any that you follow? V?
Yes, there are. I'm really terrible at remembering things off the top of my head, and I can't remember, but I will comment on this when it's kind of shared afterwards. When the recording is shared, I'll comment some as well that I think that I follow and that I've been finding quite useful for that kind of education. And one that has just come to the top of my head is the Food Medic.
Oh yeah, I really like the Food Medic.
Yeah, she's great at also combining that nutritional information with general wellbeing practices, but also exercise and also female health.
Yeah.
There's
She's a doctor as well, so
yeah, exactly. She's a doctor.
Both prongs.
Yeah, she really understands it kind of at its deepest, most fundamental level about what's going on in the body. Also, the Doctor's Kitchen, Dr. Rupi Aujla. I've been following him for years. He's got fantastic podcasts, fantastic books.
Yeah.
He's also a doctor turned nutritionist. So he's really got that foundation in both. And there's a lot of principles there that can help with kind of and recipes as well, you know, just little quick tips to help with boosting your productivity through nutrition.
Totally. And a podcast, if you want to have an audible, I've been recently listening to the new Zoe podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really good at just myth busting because they're doing a lot of research now into nutrition, which is so exciting. They're going to have more data than ever before on humans and how we respond to different foods. So they're really debunking a lot of the sort of nutrition myths or saying, yeah, no, that's a solid one, like omega-3.
Oh, that's really useful.
There's a good one.
Massive information out there, and I think a podcast. I mean, actually, I often listen to a podcast on my lunch break. So
yeah, me too.
I'm the two here. Yeah, exactly. And you know, have this kind of informal education that's also just quite interesting and gives you a bit of a break from your work. And in terms of for organizations providing food, we often see companies getting snacks in the office. Historically, these have been things like biscuits. Sometimes there'll be bread for breakfast, things like that. Not always the best foods for productivity and for kind of alertness and brain function. We've spoken a little. We've spoken a lot about peanut butter. My big peanut. But nuts actually whole have an incredible impact, and so rather than buying, having fresh fruit available in the office is a fantastic idea. I would really encourage supplementing that with adding nuts. So having nuts available again, like ideally not kind of like
salted or
flavored in any way, but just the raw and roasted.
Yum.
They're just amazing. They so satiating. They kind of have your fat, fiber, protein, and a little bit of carbs in some of them as well. So they're really kind of hitting all of the markers. And you told me an amazing statistic yesterday to share with our audience.
Yeah. So eating a handful of nuts a day reduces your risk of cardiovascular disease by 50%. I feel like it should be on billboards everywhere because it's so simple, and you only need 6 to 8 nuts a day. That's it. So although they're expensive food, you don't need much of them because obviously they're quite high in calories. So watch the amount that you're having.
That's a really, really good point. So, even organizations thinking about buying these foods for their employees, you actually just need to buy a lot less. And yes, they're a bit more expensive, but you can buy them in bulk. They'll last a little while, a lot longer than bread will. And you'll end up saving money there, and you'll also be boosting the productivity of your workforce. And actually, only 6 to 8. I mean, I have to say I'm guilty of probably having like maybe 10 times that. And
Me too.
But that's a really incredibly powerful statistic in terms of how it can affect your cardiovascular system. I think you also said something about having nuts before a meal, high sugar as well, and that reducing the glucose.
Totally. Yeah. So my boss has started tracking his blood sugar levels, and he's found that the most beneficial thing for keeping his blood sugar levels within a healthy range is having a handful of nuts before anything else, like first thing in the morning. And the reason for that is because it's got that balance of fat, protein, fiber, and as you said, a little bit of carbohydrates, which evidently just starting the day right has impacts the rest of the day with your blood sugar levels. So that's a really good top tip if you want to just start balancing your blood sugar levels. Try that first.
Wow, amazing. So I think we're kind of really selling the nuts and fruit. We're obsessed. So any other tips? I'm trying to think before we wrap up. We're kind of really cutting it fine here, but before we wrap up, any other tips that we can think of for organizations specifically? So we've kind of covered education. We've looked at supplying lunches. We've looked at having flexible benefits that include like subsidies for healthy foods. We have looked at supplying healthy snacks in the office, having protected lunch breaks. Loads of tips there, but anything
else? Maybe encouraging movement throughout the day. So not just having to stay stationary, but allowing people to just take 15 minutes to go walk just around the block. Keep moving your bodies. Use it or you lose it.
Absolutely, that's a really good point, and that actually kind of reiterates something that Lax, when you've commented about productivity not just being about mind, but it's also about the mobility of our body parts. They're so connected. Really, really important to move your body when you can. Have a standing desk. I've got kind of this in front of me, can like lower up and sit down, so you can kind of like move while you're working at your desk. Get up, go and wander around, have a break. Encouraging that kind of movement throughout the day. Standing meetings, walking meetings.
Yeah, absolutely. Get outside.
Get outside in the sunlight when we can. If you have the opportunity, if it's a one-to-one catch-up, for example, and you don't need a computer, go for a walk. I understand sometimes you might need to stop and take a note. You can still do that. It is worthwhile to kind of make the effort, or even if you're just going out and walking to sit somewhere locally, that still might be 15 minutes of additional movement that you otherwise wouldn't have.
Totally.
Wow, we've covered a lot.
Loads. Thank you for joining us and all your questions, everyone.
Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us, sharing your expertise. It's been so insightful. What a wealth of information. For anyone who wants to follow Amy, we can pop her link to her Instagram and any other contact details in the comments afterwards as well. So kind of do keep an eye on that. Just remind us, Amy, what is your Instagram for anyone looking to follow you right now?
It's amoorish.nutrition. So AMOORISH.nutrition.
Amazing. So many useful tips here. I know that Amy is also kind of really keen on foraging and
food styling. Anything food is my bag.
Food, you can kind of head to Amy. So definitely worth checking that out. And any organizations kind of looking to talk more about going a bit deeper into their wellbeing practices and how to kind of do an impact assessment on your workplace population to see what kinds of health and nutrition interventions might be most useful, then do also get in contact with us at Elite Mind Academy. We can really help you with that as well.
Amazing. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. It has been a really wonderful episode.
Awesome.
See you next